We st Okay, I guess we're gonna skip the first couple levels then. Yeah, when did I last play this? You know, and people call the bosses in Bonanza easy. One of the really odd criticisms of Donkey Kong Bonanza I have seen over the past month is this idea that it's too easy. The bosses aren't well made. They're boring. They're generic. All you do is mash buttons and then you win. I don't think there is any disputing that all of the bosses in Donkey Kong Bonanza, due to the improved mechanics, the expanded world, the environments, the variety of bosses you encounter, I don't think there's any denying that those bosses are, in fact, better than anything in the original Donkey Kong trilogy. Because if you go back and actually play the Rareware games, you will find that most of the bosses are not all that complicated. They are not that fun to fight, and they are not that challenging. And I've begun to realize, having played through about half of the original Donkey Kong Country on stream last night, that this criticism extends to not only the boss fight. These games, if you are an experienced player, are not that difficult. We struggled with these games as kids because we were 5 or whatever and didn't have the motor skills or the knowledge to play these games effectively. Things that are second nature to us now, like the roll jump and the momentum-based physics and all the more advanced tech, isn't something that a first-time player would pick up organically. You know, first-time players don't have the minecart stage completely memorized, you know? Like, these games are easy because I have spent so much time playing them over the years. And I think the same argument can be applied to Bonanza. You may think it's easy, you may think it's straightforward, but I can guarantee you that the vast majority of the target demographic, you know, kids who have never really played a Donkey Kong game before, are going to struggle with it quite a bit. Not because the game is particularly challenging, but because, you know, when you haven't played a video game in your life before ever, you know, approaching this medium can be kind of overwhelming. And that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it memorable. But this is not really a criticism. Acknowledging that these games are not as difficult as the ones that you grew up with is in no way an indictment of the quality of the product. I can say Donkey Kong Country is easy because I've spent the past 30 years playing this game nonstop, but does that make it bad? Does it diminish the game's legacy and its long-time appeal and, like, take away all the time I've spent playing it? Absolutely not. If anything, I feel the exact opposite, that the reason I've played this game so much is because it is one of the greatest games of all time. And it has stood tall as one of the best games Nintendo has ever produced, right? This is one of my all-time favorite video games, even though I can now beat it in under an hour. Although I will always prefer the Donkey Kong Country duology, 1 and 2, not 3, as my personal favorite Donkey Kong games ever made. In a lot of respects, we do have to acknowledge a lot of the improvements that Donkey Kong Bonanza has made over the initial formula. Being fully 3D, having better combat, having better enemy design, having better boss fights, you know, having more things you can do in the environment and world. All of these things are things that Bonanza does far better than anything in the original Donkey Kong Country. You can argue that you love the aesthetic and the style and the character designs and the animations, but at the end of the day, you cannot do a fraction of the things you can do in Donkey Kong Bonanza in Donkey Kong Country. And those features are what makes Donkey Kong Bonanza so interesting and special to new audiences. Nintendo has grown and evolved the Donkey Kong brand far past what it initially was. And you can argue at the end of the day, that there are some elements that were lost. Like I personally miss a lot of the Kong family members, and I miss the Rareware vibe, and I'm not as attached to the new Donkey Kong design. Like there are things you can talk about that haven't been carried over well from the Rareware days, but at the end of the day, you fundamentally cannot argue that Donkey Kong Bonanza is not a fantastic game and is a golden example of just how Nintendo is fully capable of completely reinventing one of their most iconic characters for the release of their new console. This is something that nobody saw coming going into the release of the Nintendo Switch 2, and the fact that so many people are so adamantly refusing to see the appeal of Donkey Kong Bonanza is laughably stupid. Ergo, the claim that Donkey Kong Bonanza isn't as difficult as Donkey Kong Country is not really truly a criticism, it is a cope. The people who wanted Donkey Kong Bonanza to fail from the onset, mostly nostalgia-blinded boomers in their 40s, the people who wanted to see this game fail are continuing to make excuses in regards to why they will never play it or why they won't enjoy it, even long after it was critically acclaimed and became a huge bestseller on Switch 2, and one of the primary reasons to own the console. There is no denying at this point that Donkey Kong Bonanza is this huge, huge hit, this huge, huge success story, something that people will look back on fondly for generations. Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to go down in history as like one of the best 3D platformers of the decade, if not the best, and yet quite a few people can talk about is this weird misconception that it will in no way replace Donkey Kong Country, and it will never be seen as better than it. Instead of, actually evaluating the game based on its own merits. The difficulty thing is a cope. There is nothing to it. There is no nuance to it. There is no thought put into it. There is no consideration given to the fact that there's far more bosses in Bonanza than in any other Donkey Kong game ever. There is no thought put into the mechanics and just the target demographic and what people are actually looking for in this game. There is no consideration given to just how well received the final boss in Bonanza has been, and it's just something that a lot of people are writing off or ignoring. Or if they do acknowledge it, simply say that the final boss is the only good thing about Donkey Kong Bonanza. I think if you're going to complain about a game's difficulty and then start throwing a bunch of caveats into it, like, oh, I didn't collect everything, I didn't do the post game, I didn't beat the final stage, I didn't go through the boss rush. You're just making it very obvious that you haven't put the time and effort needed to experience everything there is to find in this 60-hour game. The reality is, Donkey Kong Bonanza's primary difficulty does lie in collecting things. It does lie in looking around everywhere for everything you need to find and collect. That's the challenge in it. It's different than an NES style of platformer where you just die a lot. But, this is something that a lot of people just kind of refuse to accept, is that this game doesn't end after you beat it. In fact, I would say a lot of my opinions on the game changed pretty drastically after the credits rolled and I did all the post-game content and did everything I needed to do. I feel as if the critics for this game were simply unwilling to commit the time necessary to really get a feel as to what this game actually is. This is a game, much like Mario Odyssey, that people are going to come back and play for years after finishing it. And I feel as if the criticisms towards this game really fail to account for that fact. This isn't like Donkey Kong Country, where you'll beat it in an hour and then have nothing else to do other than just replay the game again because it's just so good. Like Bonanza has real substance to it that'll keep you coming back forever. And I the game simply doesn't need to be super challenging to get people to come back. And I feel as if this cope that the game isn't that hard is going to fall apart as more and more people realize just how difficult it is to do everything in this game.